It started with a smile. The kind of smile that hides panic behind perfectly whitened teeth. Meghan Markle stood at the edge of a glittering ballroom, her hand gently resting on Prince Harry's arm, her eyes darting from face to face, waiting for one particular person to notice her. The chandeliers above shimmered like frozen fireworks, cameras flashed like lightning, and somewhere between the laughter and champagne, Kris Jenner turned and didn't move. She saw Meghan. Meghan smiled, lifted a hand, and started walking toward her. And that's when Kris said it. Calmly, coldly, with that signature Kardashian control. I don't know you. Before we continue, please hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and turn on the notification bell for updates. For a second, the world stopped spinning. A few people turned their heads. Someone's glass clinked too loudly. Harry froze. And Meghan, the woman who had shared stages with world leaders, who had walked beside the late Queen's grandson, who once called Oprah her friend, stood there in silence. The birthday music played on, but all she could hear was that sentence echoing through her skull. I don't know you. It wasn't just a rejection. It was a message. Hollywood had officially closed its golden gates. But what led to this moment? How did Meghan Markle, once one of the most photographed women in the world, become a social ghost at the birthday party of Hollywood's most connected matriarch? And what made Kris Jenner, a woman who built an empire on inclusivity, attention, and calculated charm, deliver one of the coldest rejections of modern celebrity history? You're about to find out. Because behind the smiles and camera flashes that night was a web of alliances, unspoken power plays, and a Hollywood hierarchy that had quietly decided Meghan and Harry no longer belonged. The people who once courted them for charity galas and red carpet appearances had moved on. The invitations still arrived, but the warmth was gone. They were there, but they weren't welcome. And that's where our story begins. Imagine the scene. Beverly Hills, November 2025. Kris Jenner's 70th birthday, a spectacle of excess and elegance even by Kardashian standards. The guest list read like a Forbes dream. Kim and Kendall, the Hadids, Leonardo DiCaprio, Jeff Bezos, Selena Gomez, Oprah's inner circle, and yes, even a few royals and billionaires quietly flown in under the radar. The night pulsed with power. Every conversation had purpose, every camera flash had an agenda, and every smile could start or end a career. And then, the car arrived. A black Range Rover rolled up to the entrance, and out stepped Meghan Markle and Prince Harry. The crowd murmured. The photographers tensed. It wasn't the first time they had appeared uninvited, but it was the first time they had appeared unwanted. The irony was impossible to ignore. Meghan and Harry, who once claimed they were escaping the suffocating world of monarchy, were now desperate to be accepted by Hollywood's version of royalty. And yet, Kris Jenner's event was not just another birthday party. It was the gatekeeping event of the year, an unspoken test of who's in and who's out. As Meghan entered, you could feel the temperature in the room drop. Not visibly, no one gasped, no one whispered, but in that way celebrities can sense a shift. A glance too long, a smile too tight, a conversation that stops as you pass. Meghan felt it immediately. The air was different here. The power dynamic wasn't in her favor anymore. She scanned the room, eyes searching for a friendly face. Oprah wasn't there. Serena wasn't there. Even Tyler Perry, who once offered his home as refuge, had politely declined his RSVP. But Kris was radiant, glowing, the queen bee in her hive of fame and influence. And that's when Meghan decided to take the shot. She told Harry she'd be right back and began walking toward Kris. Her publicist had told her earlier that day that a single picture with Kris would fix everything. A new narrative, a new headline. Kris Jenner welcomes Meghan Markle into Hollywood inner circle. One photo op could rewrite months of bad press. That's how the game was played, or so she thought. She rehearsed her lines in her head. Kris, happy birthday. You look stunning. And maybe, if the timing was right, she'd suggest a photo together. Friendly, organic, spontaneous. That was the plan. But Kris wasn't playing. Kris's smile never faltered, but her eyes hardened. And with that one line, I don't know you, she sent a shockwave through Hollywood's glittering elite. Now, you might be wondering, why did Kris say that? Was it personal? Petty? Or was she protecting something? Or someone? Because the truth is, Kris Jenner's rejection didn't come out of nowhere. It came after weeks of tension behind the scenes, a quiet feud brewing between the Kardashian empire and the Sussex brand. A feud that would expose how fragile Meghan and Harry's Hollywood standing really was. You see, the Kardashians have spent decades mastering the art of attention, but they've also mastered control. They decide who enters their orbit and who doesn't. Meghan, with her unpredictable press tactics, her Netflix controversies, her history of turning every friendship into a headline, was seen as a liability. Kris didn't just reject Meghan. She distanced her family from a brand she saw as toxic PR dynamite, and the industry followed suit. Days before the party, whispers had already begun. Meghan's invitation had supposedly come through a secondary source, not from Kris herself. Some guests had joked, "They're still trying?" Others rolled their eyes. The Sussexes were no longer mystery royals. They were overexposed outsiders. And that label, in Hollywood, is the kiss of death. Still, Meghan believed this was her redemption night. She had chosen her outfit carefully, elegant, understated, but striking enough to demand attention. She believed a single picture could reverse her public image. But what she didn't know was that Kris had already made a decision, one whispered among her guests before the couple even arrived. No photo ops, no cameras near them. A quiet, surgical exclusion, executed with Kardashian precision. When Kris uttered those 4 words, she wasn't improvising. She was delivering a premeditated message to Meghan, to the press, and to everyone watching. You don't get to use me. And that's what cut deepest. Because for Meghan, every relationship had become a transaction, a partnership, a performance. But Kris wasn't buying tickets to her show. She'd seen this act before, and she wasn't going to be the next character in it. As the night went on, Meghan tried to stay composed. She smiled, laughed, posed with a few guests willing to take neutral photos. Harry hovered protectively beside her, whispering reassurance. But the mood was tense. Conversations around them shifted awkwardly. And behind closed doors, phones buzzed with the same text message. "Did you see what just happened?" By midnight, the story was already leaking. Kris Jenner snubs Meghan Markle at 70th birthday. Hashtags were forming, speculation rising. Some defended Kris, saying she was setting boundaries. Others pitted Meghan, claiming she was being targeted. But beneath all the noise, one truth remained. Hollywood had picked a side, and it wasn't Meghan's. What's more shocking is what happened after. Because Kris's "I don't know you" wasn't just personal. It was strategic. Sources later revealed that several A-list PR teams had quietly advised their clients to keep distance from Meghan and Harry in public. "They're unpredictable," one insider said. And unpredictable isn't safe when you've built an empire on control. Control. That word would define the next phase of Meghan's downfall. Her image, once carefully curated as the modern royal rebel, was unraveling. Her team couldn't spin this one. Even the most loyal outlets hesitated to defend her. And Kris? She didn't say another word. She didn't need to. The silence did the work. The following morning, paparazzi photos flooded social media. Kris posing with Oprah, Kim with Jeff Bezos, Khloe with Selena. Even Caitlyn made an appearance. But Meghan? Nowhere to be found. It was as if she hadn't even been there. And that's when Harry knew something had shifted. Meghan's face that morning said it all. The tight jaw, the quiet frustration, the disbelief. She had chased acceptance and collided with rejection. She had tried to reclaim her image and found herself erased instead. But the story didn't end there. Because just hours after the party, Kris made one post that would send shockwaves through both Hollywood and royal circles. A post that seemed harmless, celebratory even, but carried a hidden message that every insider understood instantly. And when Meghan saw it, she realized Kris's "I don't know you" wasn't just about her. It was about everyone who'd ever tried to use Kris Jenner's spotlight for their own. But what exactly did Kris post? And what secret message did it contain that made Meghan's team go into crisis mode within minutes? That's where we go next. Because what came after the birthday party wasn't just damage control, it was Hollywood war. And no one, not even Meghan Markle, saw it coming. It wasn't just a party. It was an empire reunion. Kris Jenner's 70th birthday wasn't a casual Hollywood get-together. It was a coronation. The queen of reality television was celebrating not just her age, but her legacy. Every chandelier sparkled like it had been instructed to. Every glass of champagne shimmered with intention. There were no random guests. Every name on that list had purpose, influence, and a perfectly managed reputation. To be invited meant you mattered. To be seen there meant you belonged. And then came the guest list that broke the internet. 2 weeks before the event, snippets began leaking online. A-list names popped up like stars across social media. Kim Kardashian, Oprah Winfrey, Jeff Bezos, Leonardo DiCaprio, Ellen DeGeneres, Jennifer Lopez, and even Beyoncé, rumored to be making an appearance. Every outlet from TMZ to the Daily Mail speculated about who would attend and who would be snubbed. The internet was obsessed with one question. Would Meghan Markle and Prince Harry be there? The rumors started innocently enough. Meghan's camp had hinted that she and Kris had mutual friends. A vague comment here, a friendly smile there, all meant to suggest proximity. Meghan's team knew that association with Kris Jenner could mean image rehabilitation. After months of declining popularity, strained partnerships, and icy Hollywood receptions, a single night among the Kardashians could rewrite the narrative. Or so they thought. But inside Kris Jenner's inner circle, things were very different. Days before the celebration, Kris gathered her core team, Kim, Khloe, Kourtney, and Corey Gamble, for a private dinner at her Calabasas estate. The topic? Security, press control, and the final guest list. Kris was known for her discretion. Her events were more tightly run than royal functions. But when Meghan's name came up, the mood shifted instantly. Kim rolled her eyes. Kourtney sipped her drink without comment. Corey looked uncomfortable. Kris tilted her head slightly and said the words that would later echo in every gossip column in the world. Let's not make this a charity event. To her, Meghan represented chaos, the kind of unpredictable publicity that couldn't be managed. For Kris, the queen of control, unpredictability was poison. The Kardashians had spent decades learning to weaponize exposure. But Meghan and Harry? They were known for weaponizing sympathy. And sympathy didn't sell at a billionaire's birthday party. Still, the whispers grew louder online. The Sussex PR machine was working overtime. Select reporters began hinting that Meghan and Harry were personally invited by Kris Jenner herself. Whether it was true didn't matter. What mattered was the narrative, that they were still part of Hollywood's inner circle, that their royal glow hadn't faded. But Kris had already made her move. Invitations were digital, gold-embossed, sent through an encrypted RSVP system. Meghan's team received theirs late, too late. Some insiders claimed it wasn't even sent directly by Kris, but by a third-party assistant working under Kim. That small detail, that subtle downgrade, said everything. Meghan and Harry weren't VIPs. They were optional. The night of the event, paparazzi lined the gated entrance to the private Beverly Hills estate. Black SUVs rolled in one by one, carrying the icons of entertainment. Photographers shouted names like spells. Kim, Leonardo, Oprah. Each arrival was a headline in motion. Cameras flashed, heels clicked. The night smelled of wealth and ambition. Then the crowd murmured. A new car approached, darker, quieter, windows tinted. The energy shifted. When the Range Rover stopped, the flashes intensified. Meghan Markle stepped out first, radiant in a sleek champagne gown that shimmered under the camera lights. She smiled, waved lightly, that practiced royal grace still intact. Behind her, Prince Harry adjusted his jacket, expression neutral but tense. He wasn't built for this world. Not anymore. Reporters whispered. Are they on the list? Did Kris invite them? Are they really here? No one had answers, but everyone had theories. Inside, the atmosphere was electric. Kris stood at the center of it all, her black velvet gown glittering, her diamond earrings catching the light like tiny suns. Around her, conversations danced in 1,000 directions. Oprah and Jeff Bezos laughed over champagne. Kim and Kendall posed beside Selena Gomez. The room buzzed with power, invisible but undeniable. And that's when the news spread. Meghan and Harry are here. Phones lit up. Heads turned. Whispers rippled through the crowd. Even in Hollywood, few names stirred as much controversy as theirs. To some, they were victims of royal cruelty. To others, manipulative opportunists. Either way, they brought drama, and drama, for once, wasn't welcome. Kris noticed immediately. She didn't react. She simply adjusted her necklace and continued her conversation with Kim, who leaned in and muttered something that made Kris's lips tighten almost imperceptibly. Then Kris raised her glass slightly, smiled, and said, "Everything is under control." But it wasn't. Because in a room full of power players, everyone was watching to see how Kris would handle them. Would she embrace them, ignore them, or worse, expose them? Meanwhile, Meghan moved through the crowd like she was walking a tightrope. Every step calculated, every smile rehearsed. She waved politely at a few familiar faces, but many avoided her gaze. It wasn't personal, it was business. No one wanted to be photographed next to controversy. Meghan leaned toward Harry and whispered, "Just be natural. Smile." But Harry's smile had become a mask months ago. He wasn't here for the glitz. He was here for her. He had promised to stand beside her, no matter what. Even if it meant walking into another battlefield. This time, one lined with designer gowns and diamond earrings instead of paparazzi and press. As the evening unfolded, subtle patterns emerged. Meghan was seated far from the main table. Their names weren't printed on the primary guest board. They had been placed with what one guest jokingly called the overflow table. Influencers, business associates, and a few lesser-known producers. In Hollywood language, that was a demotion. Still, Meghan tried to stay upbeat. She took a few photos with polite guests, made small talk, and waited for the perfect moment. The one where Kris Jenner would be free for that all-important photo op. But as she looked around, she began to notice something strange. Every time she approached a group, conversations broke off. Every time she smiled for a picture, the other person subtly turned away. Her team had promised this would be her comeback moment. But all she felt was the cold distance of calculated disinterest. Then came the whispers. Not loud enough for cameras, but loud enough to sting. She's still trying. After everything? Doesn't she get it? Hollywood doesn't say no directly. It says, maybe forever. It starves you with silence until you leave. And that's exactly what Meghan was walking into. A room filled with silent rejections disguised as civility. The irony couldn't be sharper. A few years earlier, Meghan and Harry had been the darlings of the global elite, invited everywhere, adored by everyone. But fame, in Hollywood, is a currency that devalues quickly. Their tell-all interviews, public feuds, and endless self-exposure had drained their credit. And tonight, the bill had finally come due. Somewhere near the bar, Kim Kardashian leaned over to Kris and said, "She's looking for you." Kris didn't even glance up. She sipped her champagne and replied softly, "She can keep looking." It wasn't cruelty. It was calculation. Kris knew that one photograph with Meghan would instantly turn into a narrative she couldn't control. Kris Jenner embraces Meghan Markle at birthday bash. That headline alone could shift the spotlight. And Kris Jenner never shares her spotlight unless it benefits her empire. The stakes were higher than they appeared. This wasn't just about a social snub. It was about power optics. The invisible ranking system that determines who gets to sit where, pose with whom, and appear on which side of the camera lens. In that world, a single misplaced association could mean losing millions. And Meghan, in that moment, was radioactive. Still, she refused to leave without that photo. Her team waited near the edges, watching her every move, ready to capture a moment they could spin. She spotted Kris near the central table, surrounded by her daughters and a few industry giants. Meghan took a deep breath and started walking. She didn't notice how the music seemed to fade slightly, how conversations paused mid-sentence, how even Harry's posture stiffened as she approached. It was the kind of moment that changes everything. The collision of two worlds, one built on calculated fame, the other on collapsing illusion. And as Meghan moved closer, Kris's expression didn't change. No smile, no wave, just calm, polite detachment. She turned slightly, and their eyes met for the first time. For a brief second, Meghan thought she saw recognition, maybe even warmth. She smiled, ready to speak. But Kris's words came first. "I don't know you." The words landed like ice cracking underfoot, silent, cold, dangerous. Meghan blinked, unsure if she heard correctly. Kris turned away, resuming her conversation as though nothing had happened. And that's when Meghan realized this wasn't an accident. It was a public message, disguised as a private moment. The people nearby exchanged uneasy glances. A few pretended not to have heard. But the damage was done. Within minutes, the tension spread across the room like perfume. Faint, intoxicating, and impossible to ignore. Harry touched her arm gently. "Let's go," he whispered. But Meghan stayed still, frozen. Her smile, her armor, her crown, all slipping in real time. She wasn't royalty here. Not tonight. What Meghan didn't know was that Kris's words would echo far beyond the ballroom. They would become headlines. They would ignite a Hollywood storm. And they would mark the beginning of Meghan's quiet exile from the very world she once thought would save her. Because Kris Jenner's rejection wasn't spontaneous. It was orchestrated. And the reasons behind it, the alliances, the warnings, and the Hollywood whispers, were about to unravel in the most shocking way possible. But before we get to that moment, you need to understand something crucial. Kris Jenner didn't say those words to be cruel. She said them to protect something far more valuable than reputation. She said them to protect her empire. And in the next chapter, you'll see exactly how that empire prepared for Meghan's arrival, and why her downfall was sealed long before she ever stepped foot into that ballroom. Because this wasn't the first time Kris Jenner had seen a woman try to use her spotlight, but it would be the last time anyone ever tried. The music had just shifted to something slower, smoother, a remix of an old Diana Ross classic, when the doors opened again. The sound of heels echoed across the marble floor. Heads turned instinctively, and there she was. Meghan Markle, Duchess of Sussex, former actress, one-time royal, now self-made celebrity, walked into Kris Jenner's 70th birthday party as if it were a movie premiere. For a moment, even the chandeliers seemed to dim to let her shine. But this wasn't a movie. This was real life. And in real life, the audience doesn't always clap. She looked flawless, of course, she always did. The gown, custom-fitted and perfectly draped in soft gold satin, shimmered like liquid light under the spotlights. The diamond earrings were subtle, elegant, not too royal, not too Hollywood. Her hair fell in effortless waves that framed a face trained for cameras but yearning for acceptance. Every detail had been planned. From the hue of her lipstick to the tone of her smile. It wasn't just an outfit. It was a strategy. Her team had spent weeks planning this appearance. The makeup artist had been briefed on confidence glow, the stylist told to strike the balance between royal grace and California ease. The photographer stationed discreetly at the entrance. He wasn't paparazzi, he was prearranged. Every angle, every frame, was meant to tell one story. Meghan Markle had arrived, and she belonged. But the room told a different story. Inside, conversations didn't stop, but they slowed. Guests glanced discreetly over champagne flutes. Kris Jenner's parties weren't known for awkward silences. Yet there was something about Meghan's entrance that shifted the air. It wasn't hostility, not exactly. It was the quiet, assessing energy of people who already knew what came next. Prince Harry followed a few steps behind her, hands in his pockets, smile forced but polite. His tailored black tuxedo fit perfectly, but his shoulders carried the invisible weight of someone out of place. He wasn't the center of attention anymore. In Hollywood, titles fade. Relevance doesn't last forever. They stood together for a moment, surveying the glittering crowd, a living constellation of fame and influence. Kim was near the stage, surrounded by photographers. Khloe laughed with Selena Gomez. Kylie was scrolling through her phone between conversations. Corey Gamble was coordinating with event staff. And Kris, the woman of the hour, was radiant, her every move deliberate, her gaze everywhere at once. Meghan took a quiet breath. This was it. The room she needed to win back. The people she had to charm. The empire she had to re-enter. But how do you walk into a world that doesn't want you anymore and still look like you own it? Smile, she whispered to Harry. Just like old times. He nodded slightly, though his jaw was tight. He wasn't built for these rooms anymore. The laughter felt scripted, the energy rehearsed. He watched his wife glide through clusters of celebrities who pretended not to notice her and wondered how something so glamorous could feel so cold. Meghan stopped near a group of guests, stylists, influencers, producers, and greeted them warmly. A few responded with polite nods. Others smiled for a moment before turning back to their conversations. A single handshake here. A forced laugh there. It wasn't rejection, but it wasn't connection either. She knew that tone. That Hollywood polite. It was the kind of politeness that ends conversations without ending them. The kind that said, "We're happy to see you, but not to be seen with you." Inside, her heartbeat quickened. This wasn't how she pictured it. For months, her team had been pitching a new narrative, the Duchess of Redemption. Meghan's comeback arc. The misunderstood woman reclaiming her story. It was supposed to start here, at Kris Jenner's party. Surrounded by the biggest names in entertainment, smiling next to the most photographed family in the world. It was supposed to be her moment. But that's the danger of narrative. You can write the script, but you can't control the actors. Meanwhile, Kris was holding court. The cameras adored her, they always did. She moved through her guests like a general inspecting her empire. Every smile calculated, every hug rehearsed. When she laughed, the room followed. When she gestured, waiters moved. When she turned, conversations redirected. This wasn't a birthday. It was a masterclass in influence. And that's what Meghan underestimated. Kris Jenner didn't just build fame, she owned it. She had turned her daughters into billionaires and herself into an icon. She had negotiated, curated, and controlled the media for decades. She wasn't about to let anyone, not even a duchess, hijack her spotlight. But Meghan didn't know that yet. She was still rehearsing her approach. Smile, compliment, light laugh, mention mutual friends. Then casually suggest a photo. Nothing pushy, nothing desperate. Just one perfectly timed moment. Kris and Meghan, side by side. Two worlds colliding in the flash of a camera. That was the plan. But as she moved closer, she began to notice something odd. Kris was surrounded, not just by her daughters, but by people Meghan didn't recognize. Executives, strategists, people who controlled studios, networks, platforms. And they weren't looking her way. It was as if an invisible line had been drawn around Kris. A social perimeter. No one crossed it without purpose. And Meghan wasn't on the list. Still, she pressed forward, pausing to greet familiar faces along the way. Ellen's former producer. An old PR contact from her Suits days. Even Oprah's hairstylist, who smiled politely but didn't engage. Everyone was polite. Everyone was distant. She turned to Harry and whispered, "This doesn't feel right." He gave a small, strained smile. It never does. But Meghan wasn't one to retreat. She'd survived tabloids, palace politics, public criticism. She wasn't about to crumble under awkward silence. She adjusted her gown, smoothed her hair, and stepped further into the spotlight. And that's when it happened. The photographers who had been lingering near the main floor, the ones who had captured every moment of the evening, suddenly turned their lenses. Not toward her, but away. Toward Kim, toward Oprah, toward Kris. In seconds, Meghan realized she wasn't part of the show. She was the commercial break. It was a strange, disorienting feeling, to be invisible in a room built on visibility. The same cameras that once followed her every move now seemed allergic to her presence. She smiled anyway, hoping one would capture it, hoping one flash might bridge the gap. None did. The irony wasn't lost on her. She used to control rooms like this, subtly, powerfully, with a single look. Now, she was watching her power evaporate under chandeliers and champagne bubbles. Still, she had one last card to play: Kris herself. As the night went on, the atmosphere warmed slightly. Guests laughed louder, the band grew bolder, and the air filled with the comfort of confidence. Meghan waited for the right moment, when Kris was between conversations, not surrounded by handlers. She rehearsed the line again in her head. "Kris, happy birthday. I just wanted to say how stunning you look tonight." Simple, friendly, unthreatening. But fate, or Hollywood, had other plans. From across the room, a few guests watched as Meghan approached. One of them, a famous talk show host, whispered to her companion, "This is going to be awkward." Another smirked. "She's really going to try it, isn't she?" Kris noticed her coming. Of course she did. Kris Jenner noticed everything. Their eyes met briefly. A pause. A second chance for either of them to decide how this moment would go. Meghan smiled, that warm, diplomatic smile she'd perfected for cameras and crowds. Kris didn't move. Then Meghan reached her. "Kris, happy birthday. You look absolutely. I don't know you." For words. No raised voice, no insult. Just a smooth, polite, deliberate dismissal delivered with the elegance of a business executive ending a bad pitch. Meghan froze. For a heartbeat, she thought she'd misheard. Maybe Kris was joking. Maybe it was sarcasm. But Kris was already turning to greet Kim, who was laughing about something irrelevant. The conversation moved on without her. The room didn't gasp, but the silence that followed was deafening. Harry, sensing her stillness, stepped forward. "We should probably." But she didn't move. Not yet. Her mind was racing, her pride fighting with disbelief. She had imagined this night 100 different ways, but not like this. Across the room, A few guests exchanged knowing glances. Some pitied her. Others admired Kris's precision. In Hollywood, a clean cut was better than a messy scene. Meghan took a slow breath, straightened her shoulders, and forced a smile. "Of course," she murmured, as if agreeing to something that hadn't been said. Then she turned away, her heels echoing faintly against the marble. Harry followed, his silence louder than any words. They found themselves near the edge of the room again, that invisible border where relevance faded. Meghan's face remained calm, her posture perfect, but her eyes told the truth: confusion, humiliation, disbelief. She picked up a glass of champagne from a passing waiter, though she didn't drink. Her reflection shimmered faintly in the liquid. "I don't know you." The words replayed over and over, each time cutting deeper. And yet, she couldn't leave. Not yet. Not without understanding why. Because Meghan Markle, for all her composure, had one fatal flaw. She always believed she could turn rejection into opportunity. That somehow, if she just controlled the narrative hard enough, she could rewrite what had already been written. But tonight, the pen wasn't in her hand. Somewhere nearby, Kim leaned in to whisper something to Kris. They both laughed lightly, almost too perfectly. Then, as if sensing Meghan's stare, Kris turned ever so slightly and locked eyes with her again. No malice, no apology, just a quiet, unspoken power. That was the moment Meghan realized this wasn't about personal dislike. It was about hierarchy. Kris Jenner had just reminded the world who really held the throne, and it wasn't the Duchess of Sussex. The night went on. The music swelled again. The laughter returned. The moment, for everyone else, was over. But for Meghan, it had only just begun. She smiled through it, posed for a few friendly photos, and kept her composure. But something had cracked beneath the surface. Later, when they finally left, long after midnight, Meghan sat silently in the car. Harry didn't ask what she was thinking. He didn't need to. She was already planning, plotting, spinning. Because if Kris Jenner had denied her a seat at the table, she would build her own. But what Meghan didn't realize was that Hollywood's doors don't open easily once they close. And by morning, Kris's 4 words would become the most viral phrase in the industry. "I don't know you." But this wasn't the end of Meghan's humiliation. It was the beginning of a media storm that would turn one awkward rejection into a full-blown Hollywood war. Because the next move, Meghan's move, would make things 10 times worse. And it all started with one bold request. A photo. For Meghan Markle, image was survival. It always had been. In the royal world, in Hollywood, in philanthropy, image wasn't just about perception. It was currency. And that night, she was about to spend the last of it. The rejection still stung. "I don't know you." Those 4 words had followed her across the ballroom like a shadow. But as the night went on, she convinced herself it wasn't final. Kris Jenner couldn't possibly mean it, not literally. Not Kris, the queen of brand building, the woman who turned scandal into empire. Meghan told herself it was a misunderstanding, a moment taken out of context. Maybe Kris was joking. Maybe she didn't hear her properly. Or maybe, Meghan thought, she just needed to try again. This time, differently. Because one good photo could fix everything. It wasn't vanity, it was strategy. The same kind of strategy that had once made her the most talked-about woman on the planet. Meghan knew the power of a single image. The photo of her walking behind Queen Elizabeth II in her first royal engagement had gone viral worldwide. The shot of her in a white dress cradling her baby bump beneath the African sun had launched 1,000 magazine covers. But now, the cameras weren't chasing her. They were waiting for her to fail. And that was something she couldn't allow. So she waited, watched, calculated. From a corner near the mirrored bar, she studied Kris's movements like a strategist reading the board. Kris was a master of timing. She moved from table to table, making sure every guest felt seen, but never too close for too long. She understood presence. She controlled it like currency. Meghan sipped her champagne, pretending not to stare, but her mind was racing. Every photographer in the room would kill for a shot of her and Kris together. One handshake, one smile, an entire narrative rewritten. Hollywood forgives Meghan Markle. That's the headline her team had prepared weeks ago. They just needed the photo to go with it. But Kris wasn't playing along. Each time Meghan inched closer, Kris turned away, gracefully, politely, but deliberately. It was like watching someone close invisible doors one after another. Still, Meghan persisted. She waited until the crowd thinned slightly and Kris was near the cake display. An elaborate sculpture of roses, gold trim, and 7 sparkling candles representing each decade of her reign over fame itself. This was the moment. Meghan put her glass down, adjusted her gown, and walked across the marble floor with the same poise she'd once carried into Buckingham Palace. People turned to look, of course they did. But this time, it wasn't admiration. It was anticipation. Everyone could feel it coming. When she reached Kris, her voice was warm, composed, just loud enough for nearby cameras to pick up. "Kris, I just wanted to say happy birthday. It's such a beautiful night. You've really outdone yourself." Kris turned, her smile polite but paper-thin. "Thank you, darling. I'm so glad you could make it." It sounded genuine, almost friendly. Meghan smiled back, relieved. "It means a lot to be here. You've built such an incredible family, such a legacy." Kris nodded slightly, eyes flicking toward the nearby photographers, who were discreetly repositioning themselves. "We've been very blessed," she said softly. Then she turned slightly, glancing toward Kim and Khloe, who were waving her over. "Excuse me, sweetheart, I just need to." Meghan reached out, not forcefully, but with that subtle urgency of someone running out of time. "Of course, but before you go, would you mind if we got a quick photo together? Just one. You look incredible, and it would mean so much." The air around them froze. It wasn't the request itself, it was the timing, the setting, the sheer audacity of it after what had happened earlier. Even Kris's trained composure flickered for half a second. The music didn't stop, but it may as well have. Conversations dipped, and eyes turned discreetly toward the center of the room. Kris's face softened just enough to maintain politeness. "Oh, darling, I'm not taking photos right now." Meghan laughed lightly, trying to diffuse the awkwardness. "Just one, really quick. It would be such a lovely moment to remember tonight." Kris's expression didn't change. "I'm not taking photos tonight," she repeated, slower, firmer. Then she turned to Corey Gamble and said quietly, "Please escort me to the table." And that was it. The final, silent rejection. Corey nodded, stepping between them just enough to block the camera's view. Kris walked away, her back straight, her expression calm. It was over in less than 30 seconds, but the echo of that moment would last for months. Meghan stood there for a beat too long, her hand still half raised, her smile frozen. The photographers didn't click. The publicists didn't intervene. Even Harry, standing nearby, didn't move. He knew this was one of those moments you couldn't fix with words. It was happening again, the slow unraveling. The déjà vu of humiliation she'd felt back in the royal corridors when doors closed quietly, and everyone pretended not to notice. But this was worse. Because this time, there were witnesses. Hollywood witnesses. A few murmurs spread through the crowd. Did she just ask for a photo? Wasn't she already told no? Oh God, that's uncomfortable. One guest, a famous fashion designer, whispered, "That's not how you approach Kris Jenner. Ever." Still, Meghan didn't walk away. She stood tall, swallowed the sting, and smiled. "No problem," she said, as if the entire world hadn't just seen her get dismissed twice in one night. Then, turning back to Harry, she whispered, "Let's just enjoy ourselves. They'll come around." But they wouldn't, because within minutes, the story had already started to leak. Someone had caught it, not on camera, but on memory. The kind of memory that turns into gossip before dessert. A publicist whispered it to a stylist, who whispered it to a producer, who texted it to a blogger. By the time Kris's cake was cut, the phrase "Meghan asks for a photo, Kris declines" was trending on social media. It spread quietly at first, then wildfire fast. TMZ mentioned tension between guests. Dumois hinted at a certain duchess being politely turned away. TikTok creators speculated wildly, piecing together blurry snippets of video and photos of Meghan standing alone by the cake. Every outlet wanted the scoop. Every follower wanted proof. And Meghan, unknowingly, had given them exactly what they wanted, a story. Her team acted quickly. Within an hour, an unnamed source close to Meghan contacted a tabloid with a statement. The Duchess and Kris had a lovely exchange, and the media's portrayal of tension is completely inaccurate. Meghan greatly admires Kris and was honored to attend her milestone celebration. But in Hollywood, damage control often does more damage. Because Kris Jenner didn't respond. She didn't deny it. She didn't confirm it. She didn't need to. Her silence said everything. And her silence was louder than any PR spin Meghan could buy. Meanwhile, at the after-party, Kris sat in a private lounge with Kim and a few of her closest allies. Someone mentioned the online chatter. Kim scrolled briefly, then smirked. It's already trending. Kris took a sip of champagne, calm as ever. Good. Let it. There was no malice in her tone, just clarity. She knew what she was doing. By not addressing it, she allowed the story to grow in one direction, away from her, toward Meghan. Because in the power game of Hollywood image, Kris understood something Meghan never had. You don't fight the narrative, you starve it. Outside, Meghan and Harry left through a side exit. The night air was heavy with the smell of flowers and rain, the streets slick with reflection. Meghan didn't cry. She didn't speak. She just looked out the car window, watching the lights of Beverly Hills blur into gold streaks. Somewhere in that silence, she was already rewriting the story in her mind, crafting her next move. She couldn't let it end like this. Harry finally broke the silence. Maybe it's time we stop chasing them. She turned to him slowly, her expression unreadable. Or maybe it's time they remember who we are. Back at the party, Kris was photographed with every major guest. Oprah, Kim, Kendall, even a smiling Leonardo DiCaprio. Every image perfectly lit, perfectly framed, perfectly posted. By morning, those photos would flood the internet. Every one of them a reminder of who belonged in Hollywood's inner circle and who didn't. Meghan's name wasn't mentioned in a single caption, but she still dominated every headline. Awkward encounter between Kris Jenner and Meghan Markle. Duchess denied. Hollywood snub caught at Kris Jenner's party. Kris Jenner shuts down Meghan Markle's PR move. Within hours, the meme started. Side-by-side images of Meghan smiling awkwardly and Kris turning away. Caption with icy humor. I don't know you. The phrase had become an anthem, a social media punchline delivered in Kris's voice, dripping with quiet authority. And somewhere in that flood of laughter and commentary, Meghan felt something snap. For years, she had been the one setting the narrative. Now she was the headline everyone else was writing. The worst part? Hollywood wasn't laughing with her. It was laughing at her. Kris's silence was surgical. Her PR team issued no comments, made no corrections, and refused to engage with any media outlet. And that restraint made Kris look poised, untouchable, while Meghan looked desperate. The next morning, Meghan's own publicist suggested releasing a light-hearted photo to deflect the narrative. Something of her and Harry looking relaxed, unbothered. Meghan agreed. They posted a filtered image of the two sipping coffee in Montecito, captioned, "Grateful for love, life, and laughter." The internet tore it apart within minutes. Damage control post. She's spiraling. This woman can't read the room. Hollywood's silence had turned into ridicule. Behind the scenes, even sympathetic allies began to distance themselves. The Kardashians closed ranks. Studio executives stopped taking calls. Invitations grew rarer. And the private texts that once read, "We should have lunch," now said nothing at all. It was the most subtle form of exile. No confrontation, no scandal, just absence. And that, perhaps, was the cruelest rejection of all. Still, Meghan wasn't ready to let go. She believed this was temporary. That Kris's snub was a momentary misunderstanding. That Hollywood's coldness was just fear of bad press, not a verdict. But she was wrong, because Kris Jenner's quiet power extended far beyond her party. In the weeks that followed, the echoes of that night reached every corner of Hollywood. Brands, studios, and PR firms all quietly recalibrated their distance. The message was clear. Meghan Markle was no longer an asset. She was a risk. And when Hollywood labels you a risk, it doesn't warn you. It just stops calling. That single, unphotographed moment between Kris and Meghan, just one question and one rejection, had done what years of royal feuds and media scandals hadn't managed to do. It had ended Meghan's Hollywood dream. But Meghan, ever the fighter, didn't retreat quietly. She decided to fight the narrative her own way, by leaking her version of events. What she didn't realize was that Kris had already anticipated that move. Because behind the smiles, the gowns, and the laughter that night, Kris Jenner had already set something else in motion. A silent alliance that would make sure Meghan's story never overshadowed hers again. And when that alliance finally revealed itself, It would expose just how powerful Hollywood's quiet blacklist really was. But that's for the next chapter. Because Meghan's request for a simple photo wasn't just rejected. It triggered a war. And Hollywood was about to choose its side. Hollywood has a rule. One that's never written down, but everyone knows it. You don't need to ban someone publicly to end their career. You just stop returning their calls. That's exactly what started happening to Meghan Markle after Kris Jenner's 70th birthday party. No statements. No denials. No angry words. Just silence. And in Hollywood, silence is lethal. In the days that followed the now infamous photo request moment, the entertainment industry's reaction wasn't loud or dramatic. It was subtle, whispered, surgical. Kris Jenner didn't post, tweet, or speak about it once, but she didn't have to. Her absence of reaction was its own kind of message, and every major PR agency, brand, and influencer understood it immediately. Kris had drawn a line, and everyone saw which side they were expected to stand on. It started small. A call Meghan had scheduled with a luxury brand's creative director was postponed indefinitely. A podcast appearance that had been confirmed 2 weeks earlier was rescheduled for next quarter. Then her stylist, someone who had worked with her since her royal days, quietly took on another high-profile client and became unavailable. These weren't coincidences. They were signs. Hollywood had begun its silent boycott. At first, Meghan didn't realize what was happening. She thought it was just bad timing. She told Harry not to worry, that this would blow over. "We've survived worse," she said, pouring herself another cup of coffee at their Montecito mansion, scrolling through social media to see how the press was framing things. But the more she scrolled, the more she saw it, the absence. Everyone who had been at that party was posting photos. Everyone except her. Kris with Kim, Kim with Oprah, Oprah with Bezos. Even the wait staff had taken selfies near the floral wall. But Meghan's name? Vanished. She might as well have been invisible. She looked over at Harry, who was trying to read but clearly distracted. "It's fine," she said, almost convincing herself. "They're just being cautious." He didn't answer. He didn't need to. He had seen it too. The headlines, the comments, the whispers. The world wasn't mocking Kris anymore. It was mocking them. And the cruelest part? No one was saying why. Hollywood didn't destroy people with public statements. It destroyed them with indifference. When you stopped being useful, it stopped pretending you existed. Over the next few weeks, Meghan's team began noticing patterns. Invitations that used to arrive effortlessly now required follow-up emails. Former friends began responding with polite one-liners or total silence. A-list names who had once posed with her suddenly became unavailable for joint appearances. Even the tabloids, once obsessed with her, began to lose interest. Not out of boredom, but fear. Because behind closed doors, Kris Jenner's influence was more powerful than most politicians. She had built partnerships with nearly every major brand in entertainment: Hulu, Disney, Adidas, Balenciaga, Beats, and beyond. She didn't need to tell anyone to distance themselves from Meghan Markle. They did it on instinct. Aligning with Kris was profitable. Aligning with Meghan wasn't. And the message spread like wildfire. Meghan Markle was difficult PR. That label was poison. Suddenly, journalists who had once called her the world's most misunderstood woman began to hesitate. Editors softened their coverage. TV producers quietly pulled story pitches. Not because they wanted to hurt her, but because Kris's shadow loomed large over their budgets, ad deals, and connections. It wasn't a vendetta. It was business. Meanwhile, Meghan tried to pivot. She reached out to her old contacts, the ones who had helped her navigate the industry when she and Harry first arrived in California. She called a few high-profile philanthropists, emailed a few Hollywood insiders, hoping to set up lunches, meetings, collaborations. No one said no outright, but no one said yes either. Her inbox filled with polite replies. "Let's circle back. Next quarter might be better. So proud of all you're doing." But no dates, no commitments, no follow-through. That's the thing about Hollywood. The people who smile at you on camera are often the same ones quietly erasing your name from their call sheets. Harry noticed the shift too. The people who used to call him mate and brother were suddenly unavailable. Tyler Perry wasn't returning calls as quickly. Oprah's assistant said she was on a long vacation. Even Serena, who had once been Meghan's most visible ally, had gone quiet. And for Harry, the silence hit differently. He wasn't just losing Hollywood. He was watching the last bit of their American dream unravel. It wasn't supposed to go this way. They had left the monarchy to escape judgment, not to face a new kind of exile. But the truth was unavoidable. In the royal world, they had been controversial. In Hollywood, they were replaceable. And the strangest part? The people who replaced them were the same ones who had watched it happen at Kris Jenner's party. Kindle's Vogue cover replaced Meghan's rumored feature. Kim's foundation event suddenly booked Oprah as a keynote speaker instead of Meghan. Even a Netflix project that Meghan's team had been pitching quietly for months was abruptly redirected to another production company with Kardashian ties. Coincidence? Hardly. One of Meghan's PR advisors, off the record, described it best. Kris didn't blacklist her. She just made her irrelevant. That's how Hollywood's silent boycott works. It doesn't cancel you, it deletes you. Every story Meghan tried to tell was drowned out by bigger headlines. Kris's post-party photos dominated Instagram for weeks. The Kardashians launched a new business collab with Oprah's production team. Even random gossip pages stopped writing about Meghan altogether, not because they forgot, but because they'd been told, quietly, it's not worth it. Still, Meghan wouldn't back down. She held crisis meetings with her PR team, brainstorming ways to rebuild her image. They discussed new partnerships, rebranding strategies, fresh appearances, anything that could remind the world she was still relevant. Maybe we do another interview, one publicist suggested. Harry groaned. No more interviews. What about philanthropy? Another chimed in. People think we're fake, Meghan replied flatly. That was the problem. Every move now felt performative. Every smile looked rehearsed. Every speech, no matter how well-meaning, was met with cynicism. The world didn't want to hear from her anymore. They wanted to move on from her. And Kris had made sure they could. Meanwhile, in the quiet corners of Los Angeles, the producer dinners, brand luncheons, influencer retreats, the story of that night had become legend. The photo request had morphed into a Hollywood cautionary tale. Don't be like Meghan. People would whisper half-jokingly, half-seriously. Don't overplay your hand. That's what Hollywood does. It turns humiliation into folklore. Still, Meghan believed there was one person who could shift the tide back in her favor, Oprah Winfrey. If she could get Oprah to speak out, even subtly, to show she still supported her, the narrative could flip again. Oprah had always been her guardian angel in the public eye, the woman who gave her voice global credibility. But when Meghan's team reached out, they received the same answer they'd been hearing for weeks. Oprah's unavailable. Unavailable. That word kept echoing. It wasn't hostility. It wasn't rejection. It was worse. It was indifference. Because once Hollywood decides you're not valuable, it doesn't hate you. It forgets you. And yet, one name kept coming up in whispered conversations. A name connected to both Kris and Oprah. A name with quiet influence behind the scenes. Someone who had reportedly warned Kris long before the birthday party. Someone who knew exactly what Meghan was trying to do and advised Kris not to play along. That person was Kris Jenner. Rumor had it that Caitlyn had told Kris months earlier, she's going to try to use you for a comeback photo. Don't give it to her. No one knew if it was true. But Kris's actions that night seemed to confirm it. Because Kris Jenner wasn't acting out of malice. She was following advice from someone who understood the cost of misplaced alliances. And Meghan, unknowingly, had walked right into a strategy meeting that had already been planned around her. But if Kris's rejection started the silent boycott, Caitlyn's warning explained it. What Meghan didn't know was that behind Kris's calm silence, a powerful network of Hollywood elites had already formed a quiet understanding, one that would make sure Meghan's influence never threatened theirs again. This silent boycott in Hollywood, alliances are never declared, they're discovered. They don't start in conference rooms or studios. They start over dinner, whispered between people who understand one unspoken truth. Power protects itself. And Kris Jenner had spent her entire career building one of the most powerful alliances the entertainment world had ever seen. After her birthday party, as the media feasted on the Meghan Markle drama, Kris didn't panic. She didn't tweet, she didn't post, she didn't even mention Meghan's name. But privately, the calls began, quiet, strategic, and deliberate. One by one, she reached out to her inner circle. Executives, producers, studio heads, brand CEOs, the people who never appear in tabloids but own the headlines anyway. Each call was calm, courteous, and clear. She's unpredictable, Kris would say softly. You don't want that around your brand. And that was all it took. No threats, no orders, just a single, polished sentence from Kris Jenner, the woman whose family alone generated billions of dollars in entertainment revenue. Hollywood didn't need convincing. It needed assurance. And Kris was offering exactly that. Because Meghan Markle wasn't just seen as a celebrity in crisis anymore. She was seen as a liability. And liability, in Hollywood, is contagious. Behind closed doors, a quiet coalition began to form, a kind of social firewall, designed to protect Hollywood's most influential figures from association with anything unpredictable or polarizing. It wasn't official, of course. There were no contracts, no meetings, no memos. But it operated like an invisible network. When one person pulled away, the rest followed. Executives whispered to agents. Agents whispered to managers. Managers whispered to publicists. And before long, Meghan Markle's name appeared on an internal industry list, not blacklisted, but flagged. A polite way of saying, proceed with caution. The irony was brutal. Meghan had once been the media's darling, her image so carefully curated that even her silence could generate headlines. But now, the very thing she had built, her ability to dominate conversation, had turned against her. Every story, every whisper, every subtle rejection fed into one narrative. Meghan Markle was too risky to touch. Meanwhile, inside Hollywood's elite circles, something fascinating was happening. The people who once competed for attention were suddenly united, not by friendship, but by self-preservation. They'd seen what happened when someone became unmanageable. They'd seen how quickly empathy turned to exposure, how stories meant to humanize could spiral into chaos. Meghan had become a cautionary tale, proof that fame, mishandled, could backfire spectacularly. And Kris Jenner was making sure no one forgot that. Behind the scenes, she began reinforcing relationships with key figures who shaped Hollywood's public narrative, from entertainment journalists to studio PR chiefs. A few lunches here, a few phone calls there. All with the same undertone: control the message. Keep the industry safe from messiness. Because Kris understood something Meghan never had. Fame is not about being seen. It's about being trusted. And once trust is broken, image becomes poison. Hollywood's elite couldn't afford poison. One major studio executive was overheard saying during a dinner in Malibu, "She's not a bad person. She's just bad business." That line circulated quickly through private circles, quoted, reshared, and quietly accepted as gospel. Soon, PR consultants began advising clients, avoid joint appearances. Don't post photos together. Keep it neutral. The message spread like perfume, invisible but unforgettable. And within weeks, Meghan's invitations to high-profile events dwindled to nothing. She was out of the loop, not officially banned, just omitted. But the alliance wasn't just about exclusion. It was about protection. Protection for the people who had something to lose, the brands, the billionaires, the influencers who had built their image on stability and control. To them, Meghan's unpredictability represented danger, the kind that couldn't be predicted, managed, or contained. She could turn a private friendship into a headline, a casual encounter into an interview, a personal conversation into a narrative about betrayal. And Hollywood hates chaos that it doesn't control. That's why Kris's alliance didn't just include friends. It included competitors. Women like Oprah Winfrey, Kim Kardashian, Ellen DeGeneres, and even Reese Witherspoon, all known for their precision in image management. They might not always agree on politics or business, but they agreed on this. Meghan Markle was off limits. You could be polite. You could be supportive. But you couldn't be photographed with her. Meanwhile, Meghan was growing desperate for answers. Everywhere she turned, doors that had once been wide open were now quietly locked. The smiles remained, the niceties flowed, but the warmth was gone. She didn't know it yet, but she was walking through a maze built specifically to keep her out. Even Harry noticed it. "They're afraid of us," he said one night, scrolling through a flood of posts from Kris's party, each one a collage of smiles and connections, none including them. Meghan nodded but said nothing. She didn't want to admit the truth out loud, that this wasn't fear. It was rejection. A few days later, Meghan's assistant got a call from a producer she'd known for years. The conversation started friendly, small talk, light laughter, until the tone shifted. "Listen," he said, lowering his voice. I like you, so I'm telling you this quietly. Stop pitching her. She's not going to get meetings right now. People have been told to keep their distance. Meghan's assistant hung up and stared at the phone for a long moment before telling her. Meghan listened, face calm, eyes distant. Told by who? The assistant hesitated. They didn't say. Just, everyone knows. Everyone knows. Those two words echoed through the house like a verdict. But Meghan didn't want to believe it. She still thought this could be fixed, that one big gesture, one public act of redemption, could reverse everything. Maybe if she showed the world she was still in the circle, still connected to the power players, people would stop treating her like a social contagion. She started brainstorming ideas, charity galas, speaking panels, even a new Netflix project centered around resilience. But what she didn't realize was that the people she was reaching out to had already made a quiet pact. They weren't going to risk it. Not for her. Not again.